It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeneuve. Hi, Flo. Now, part of what makes France so famous around the world are its countless historical monuments. They seem to be everywhere around the country, but paying for the upkeep for these national treasures is turning out to be quite a headache.
That's right. It's kind of the flip side of having this abundance of historic buildings and works of art is how do you pay for them without busting the bank? But before we dive into what's at stake, there's a word that you have to know in French. Here it is. Patrimoine. Now, this is often translated as heritage. It's something that's handed down from generation to generation, something that you inherit. So it can be a physical estate or a property, a gene pool. They talk about the patrimoine génétique, or something more abstract like cultural heritage. But what we're going to focus on today is physical patrimoine. And France, as you said, is a treasure trove. There are obvious things, of course, like the Eiffel Tower or the Mont Saint-Michel, the Canal du Midi, but that is really just the tip of the iceberg.
It really is, because there's this extensive catalog of these hundreds of historic sites across the country.
In fact, the vast majority of French patrimoine is in the countryside. And now many of these castles, forts, and abbeys are historic monuments, and it's really part of what makes France so beautiful, part of what makes it so attractive to tourists. But a lot of this heritage, unfortunately, is decaying. For example, of France's about 4,000 castles, 600 are in bad shape. In fact, it's estimated that a quarter of listed buildings are in need of urgent repair, much to the chagrin of locals. Take a listen.
This is part of our village's history. We want it to stay in good shape and not be destroyed. It's important for our memories. Financially, we can't restore everything. Decisions have to be made, and we have to stay within a subsidized budget. There can't be any bad surprises. You always have to juggle between what's absolutely necessary and what's financially viable.
Figuring out a way to pay for the upkeep of all of these historic treasures is really proving to be a puzzle. Now, the government does have a budget to restore heritage sites. It's 326 million euros, but even that's not enough.
In fact, the government recently came up with a solution to try and raise extra cash. It wants to raise between 15 and 20 million euros. And this is a special heritage lottery and a set of scratch cards. Now, this kind of scheme exists in other countries. For instance, there's the British Heritage Lottery Fund, and in Australia, they funded the Sydney Opera House through a similar lottery. This is, however, new to France, and the first edition of this heritage lottery, essentially the government selected, they had to make a short list of sites to save, about 269 endangered masterpieces across the country, and to head the project, they chose someone who is kind of a national treasure himself, Stéphane Bern. He's a TV star who's often talking about royalty, etc. Now, he says that part of the problem here in France is, first of all, there's this abundance of treasures everywhere, and also the fact that French people tend to expect the state to take care of a restoration, but he says that's just simply not possible.
It's the government's mission to pay, but so much money is needed to save all our heritage. The government simply can't afford it. Public subsidies are dropping. Private owners don't have enough money, so we have to find other solutions.
So the first edition of this heritage lottery was held in September 2018, and French people, well, they quite enjoyed it. Take a listen.
Will you play to save the monuments?
I'll give something. I think it's an excellent initiative to save monuments.
There's not enough public money to do everything, so you have to find other sources. Like us, we have to participate in saving France's heritage.
Now, gambling might be the answer to save some sites, but others are counting on foreigners to step in, like, for example, Notre Cathedral.
It's one of the most visited sites in France. Each year it draws over 14 million visitors, and entry is free, so you can imagine why people rush to see it. Now, it might not be obvious from the outside, but Notre Dame is actually crumbling. Now, the cathedral is very old. It's over 850 years old. That's really old, and it's been ravaged by the centuries, but also more recently by pollution. Now, these days, the menacing grins of gargoyles are barely recognizable. In fact, the very structure of the church is in danger. About 150 million euros are needed for repair. So the government is ready to chip in, but it can't cover everything. And so authorities at Notre Dame are actually pinning their hopes on generous donations from Americans. And they say that Americans have a very special connection to the cathedral, and it goes way beyond musicals and, well, cartoons, I guess you could say.
For the Americans, the connection is also a connection because of the history of the cathedral, because also of the novel of Victor Hugo, Notre Dame de Paris, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's also part of the American history because one of the most famous moments of the cathedral was the liberation of Paris by the US Army in 1944. So there are many things that link the cathedral to the US.
Other foreign investors, though, are going so far as to actually buy French heritage sites, and not everyone's so happy about that.
Well, that's the case of vineyards, for instance, in Bourgogne and Bordeaux, regions that are considered to be UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And in recent years, there's actually been a wave of Chinese investment that are essentially Chinese investors buying struggling domains. And this wave of investment has upset some locals who say they're being priced out by very wealthy foreigners, but others play down the danger.
It's not scary because it's part of Bordeaux's DNA to attract investors from around the world. Right now there's a wave of Chinese investment. Before it was American, but the chateaux stay in Bordeaux.
They bring a lot of good to the domains. It's more than just a financial investment. On the contrary, they appreciate our French heritage. It's good.
If you want to find out more about saving France's national heritage, I do recommend watching another show here on France 24, France in Focus, where they investigate some other solutions being put forward, like crowdfunding.
Check it out. Thank you so much for that, Florence Villeminot, and for that look at just what's being done here in France to try and save this incredible patrimoine. Don't forget, if you have other questions for Flo about France or the French, you can always send her a tweet at Flo Villeminot.